welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. This is our 4th of July weekend edition for 2014, and we've got to look backward to some extent, necessarily to the beginnings of World War I. We've just had the Sarajevo assassination anniversary on the 28th of June, and we will have the first large declarations of war and military events of World War I on the 28th of July. Never forget that although Serbia was the first to mobilize armed forces on the 25th of July, 1914, the British were the first great power to mobilize, and specifically their Navy, which was what counted most with them by far. British Navy mobilized on July 28th, going through the English Channel at night, high speed, no lights, to Scapa Flow, the war base. So when you remember which great power mobilized first in World War I, answer the British. And it's not a pretty picture. The whole war guilt question has got to be reposed and skewed in the direction of London, and particularly of King Edward VII's network. Since he was no longer on the scene, it was a network of people who were there. So we'll be concerned with that general question for the next several years because of the series of anniversaries. But now, at the beginning of World War I, this anniversary especially acute, we've also got to look back to the Civil War. But above all, we've got to deal with the fact that when we talk about World War I, this question of July 1914, the dream world of European civilization, there were some people who wanted war: Sir Edward Grey, Sir Jackie Fisher, the head of the Royal Navy, quite a number of people on the Freemasonic side of things, people in the Quatuor Coronati Lodge and other top Freemasons of the British variety. You had these people like Poincaré and Clemenceau, who looks like they wanted war, and I'm afraid Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich of Russia and the group around him were also interested in having a general war. But for most people, it was a dream world. It was a fool's paradise. It was a Pollyannish delusion. And isn't that somewhat similar to what we have? You look at somebody like Kerry of Skull and Bones, right? Freemasonic conspiratorial organization. And then we look at Susan Rice. We look at Samantha Power. I wonder what lodge she belongs to, and so on down the line. Right? And then we look at Haig and so forth. Let me just point out one interesting thing, though. The French President Sarkozy has been essentially jailed. He's been held for questioning and transferred in the middle of the night in police custody from one branch of the French police to the other. The former French president has, in effect, been jailed. Now, think about that. This is not an everyday occurrence. When is the last time that the former head of state of a NATO country and a permanent member of the Security Council has been put in essentially police custody, in jail, to use shorthand, right? There's something of a technicality under French law, whether you're held for questioning or whether you're actually arrested, but it's similar enough for our purposes. This arrest by itself is symptomatic of a kind of a crisis in the Western world, and the factional lineups around this are going to be interesting because it obviously is a political event. However, we also have to point out that not one but two serving justices of the French Supreme Court, in effect, have also been, in effect, jailed, held for questioning. And the way that this goes is the following. Muammar Gaddafi of Libya trying to buy protection, in effect, against an Anglo-French attack. And we know that the Anglo-French aggressive attack had been set up in the fall of 2010. I think in about November 2010, there's an Anglo-French treaty which calls for an attack on a large oil-producing country in North Africa, clearly Libya, as it turned out. We also ought to point out that another top Freemason, Roland Dumas, D-U-M-A-S, of France, had pointed out that the attack on Syria had been revealed to him by British diplomatic friends in 2009, apparently, 2 years before the Syrian destabilization started. But in the case of Libya, it starts at least in 2010. And you'll remember then that Sarkozy took the lead. He was the first country to start bombing Libya, and he did so under the urging of Bernard-Henri Lévy, the new philodoxer, not a philosopher, not a philosophe, but a philodoxer, someone who loves ignorant, vulgar opinion. And this BHL, as he called himself, had visited the Libyan rebels. He'd essentially gone cavorting with the terrorists in Benghazi, Tobruk, and Derna. And then he'd gotten on the phone with Sarkozy and told him it was time to start bombing because otherwise a terrible event would take place in Benghazi. So Sarkozy ordered the bombing. NATO followed. Stupid Obama went along with this as a tail on the Anglo-French kite. And this, of course, was Cameron and Haig on the British side and Sarkozy on the French side, urged on by Bernard-Henri Lévy. So Gaddafi had given money to Sarkozy to get him elected, and he hoped to buy the neutrality of France. In other words, don't attack me here. I'm going to give you all this money. Sarkozy turned around with consummate treachery and then attacked Libya, making himself guilty of genocide in the process, as did many others. Samantha Power and so forth are also in the same boat. However, it then became a question of covering up that money, that contribution, campaign contribution from Muammar Gaddafi. And in order to carry out the cover-up, Sarkozy used the services of two corrupt judges on the French Supreme Court. Now, this is the Cour de Cassation. The Cour de Cassation is the highest court because what it does is to evaluate the constitutionality and other validity of all other judicial proceedings in the country. So it's the Supreme Court. And the accusation is, right now, that Sarkozy as president and then later used a network of corrupt judges, perhaps we ought to say a network of corrupt justices, on the French Supreme Court, the Cour de Cassation. Now, when I think of a network of corrupt justices, I think of the Rats cabal, Roberts, Alito, Thomas, Scalia, this group of, in effect, fascistoid or ultra-reactionary judges who have just been parading their reactionary handiwork in the form of the Hobby Lobby decision, the anti-labor decision on the agency fees, and so forth. So maybe we should ask ourselves, if the French can put Supreme Court justices in the clink, maybe that's going to be possible and necessary here in the U.S. also. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. For all of your needs in understanding what's going on in the world, you got to make your headquarters Tarpley.net, Tarpley.net. We've got quite a number of postings over the last weeks as the world crisis has deepened. So have our broadcasts and other articles and things have increased. Now, I want to especially call to your attention the best book you're going to find about the beginnings and the causes of World War I. And this is going to be challenging for some people because it does involve foreign languages. But still, the principal article, the one by me, Edward VII, the Triple Entente, and World War I. And it's actually the original title is something more dramatic. Let's see if we can find it. The original title of this article, the article itself is King Edward VII of Great Britain, Evil Demiurge of the Triple Entente, and World War I. And this article essentially is the most concise and the most capable summary of King Edward VII and his personal network. And I point this out because we have a couple of books which belatedly are starting to take, what can we say, tentative steps to some degree in this same direction. In other words, focusing on King Edward VII. But the problem that a lot of them have is that they are stuck with the Carroll Quigley idea that somehow the Milner coefficients and the Milner kindergarten are somehow a force of their own. One book even arrives at trying to say that Milner is the guy who started World War I. Certainly, the British did start World War I. The interesting one book is called Lord Milner's Second War. This is by a guy called Cafferky, Cafferky. Lord Milner's Second War, the Rhodes-Milner Secret Society, the origins of World War I, and the start of the New World Order. The problem with this is that this is several steps down from the level where the decisions were actually made. In other words, the personal protagonist of setting up World War I is King Edward VII of Great Britain and nobody else. And all these other people are essentially tools, stooges, running dogs, clerks, mercenaries working for King Edward VII, who did the diplomacy personally. The other question is that although the network is absolutely centered in Great Britain, it is a continent-wide Freemasonic network and includes these people like Théophile Delcassé of France, Izvolsky of Russia, and many others. So this notion of Milner as somehow the evil demiurge, he's not. The evil demiurge is precisely King Edward VII. And Milner's an important guy, but he's operating in this field which is determined by King Edward VII. The point of that being, there are some times in the history of the British monarchy when the constitutional monarch in recent centuries coincides with the head of the oligarchy. And this is what King Edward VII, or Edward, Prince of Wales, was able to do from 1860 to 1900. He created this unparalleled network, virtually ran French politics in particular. So the head of the oligarchy coincided with the monarch, and that's what made him the most successful political operator of the House of Windsor since its founding, and the most successful British monarchical operator since who? William the Conqueror? I don't know. There's another book here called, let's see if we can find it, The Hidden History of World War I by Docherty and McGregor, and they also make some efforts in the right direction. King Edward VII does come up here, and Milner, King Edward VII, and Churchill. Of course, Churchill was simply a clerk for Edward VII. Milner was an operative in the service of King Edward VII. So the climate is changing. These books are worth something, but don't start with them. Start with this other one, my book. And it's put together by Progressive Press of California as La France Conquise, because in addition to what I say about this, I have called people's attention and discovered or rediscovered these important books. Émile Florent, former French foreign minister, in 1907, had written "France Conquered by Edward VII." That French politics were essentially run by Edward VII, and indeed that Edward VII was more powerful in Paris than he was in London. And this other interesting pamphlet, Reinhold Wagner's attack on King Edward VII, the greatest criminal against humanity in the 20th century, King Edward VII of England. So that's all in there. There's also an essay there on Théophile Delcassé, which is the question of fashoda and these shenanigans in Africa. But the book by Florent is prophetic, and the summary that I give, I think, is better than the ones in these other books. So I urge you to get that book. You're going to want that on paper, and the copies of Émile Florent are very hard to find. It's not hard to read French, right? When you learn a couple of essential morphological tools, you can go ahead and do it. All right. So we're doing all this. But now, are we in July 1914 right now? Well, as we said, Sarkozy and two Supreme Court justices have been held in jail at least overnight, as far as I can see. And the question is there a network of agents in the French Supreme Court? And my comment is, it's been pretty evident to me for some years that the Rats Cabal is nothing but a network of agents inside the U.S. Supreme Court. So it indicates the depth of this crisis that we're in. Now, concerning Iraq, first of all, even though I think Ukraine is more important, I think by far, the U.S. is still refusing to bomb Iraq. Now, this is funny. Not that I'm in favor of bombing. I'm not. I don't want the U.S. to bomb Iraq, but I'm simply trying to point out, when did the U.S. ever refuse to bomb anybody? They're always avid to bomb. Why is it that they don't want to bomb now? It points again to the idea that this ISIS business is a fraud. We're told by the U.S. State Department, on the one hand, ISIS is the end of the world, right? Chaos, delirium, and the collapse of everything. It's the end of the world. But we can't bomb them until they have a national unity government. We can't do anything to help Maliki because he's not inclusive. He's not politically correct. You see how ridiculous this is. ISIS is a U.S., British, NATO operation paid for by the Saudis and others. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. And let me remind everybody and thank everybody, thanks to you, I turn out to be the most popular living Civil War lecturer in the C-SPAN video library. Take a look. Put in Civil War in quotes in the C-SPAN video library, and you will find a long afternoon spent with Shelby Foote in 2001, leads the pack. But after 2001, I am the most prominent with the lecture on the Russian fleets. So I am the number 2 Civil War lecturer in the history of the C-SPAN video library in terms of how many views on the video library. I am the most popular in the last years since 2001, so over a 13-year period, I am the most popular. I am the most popular historian of the sesquicentennial in terms of views on C-SPAN video library. And I guess I am the most popular of all time on C-SPAN of the pro-Union, pro-Lincoln, and anti-lost cause historians. So I want to thank everybody for that. And if you haven't seen it, by all means, see it. And I'm hoping that when my lecture has been up there for 14 or 15 years, that I may give Shelby Foote, the late Shelby Foote, a run for his money. So now, the U.S. refuses to bomb Iraq. This simply shows that it's bad faith, right? The thing is a fraud. This is a secret army of the CIA, ISIS, ISAM, whatever they call it. This has now declared a caliphate. They are essentially operating from the Bernard Lewis playbook. The Bernard Lewis playbook is that you've got the ethnic divisions from below in the Arab world, attempting to destroy the nation states, and then from above, right, this utopian world-encompassing idea of the caliphate. But remember, caliphate means empire, and empire means worldwide. So this is an attempted translatio imperii. Translatio imperii, when you move the empire, say, from Rome to Byzantium, or other moves that have been contemplated in history. This is an attempt to reconstitute it. I would urge people, go back to the speeches of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk in 1919, 20, 21, 22, where he's telling you why the caliphate is a bad thing for Turkey. You don't want it. And he kept telling the Turks, don't go along with it. Speaking of Turks, if ISIS really were what the U.S. and others claim, the Turkish military, extremely capable, has often gone into northern Iraq and northern Syria to deal with Kurds. If the Kurds get too well organized or powerful, periodically the Turkish military conduct punitive expeditions in there. It would be child's play for the Turkish military to go in and cut off the supply lines and bases of ISIS. Instead, what we're hearing is that bombing may occur. We just watched the press conference here. It's July 3rd as we record the press conference of Dempsey and Hagel in the Pentagon, and the talk seems to be that if there is bombing, it may cross the line into Syria, which would be a very serious escalation. So Putin, as we've noted, has seen this. Putin immediately declared his support for Maliki and then backed it up with these used airplanes, but quite capable aircraft. In the middle of all this, we have the case of this character, Shishani. Shishani meaning the Chechen, and this Shishani is a leading Chechen killer of the NATO-backed Chechen rebels, who has now been transferred into ISIS, and he's now vying with Baghdadi for supremacy. This is very interesting. Will there be a shootout between Baghdadi, four-year graduate of U.S. prisoner of war camps, presumably brainwashed double agent of the CIA or something like this, and on the other hand, Shishani, who comes from the anti-Russian Chechen forces? At least that's what it looks like on the surface. There may be more to that. Who knows? But Shishani, I'm urging all of you busy, energetic, enterprising journalists out there, if you want to get some information about Shishani, you should call Ilyas Akhmadov, because remember, we have ambassadors from the Chechen terrorist organization. There's one in London whose name I do not have, but Ilyas Akhmadov is the one here in Washington, D.C., and for quite a number of years he was getting a Dante Fasel grant, including House, income, secretary, office, travel budget, public relations budget for the Chechen terror group. Remember, he got it with the help of Zbigniew Brzezinski. Since you're going to be going to Tarpley.net to buy some books, go and buy Obama, the Postmodern Coup, and in that you will find Obama campaign linked to Chechen terrorism, and that is the Brzezinski role in getting permanent political asylum for Ilyas Akhmadov. But since he's here, you might as well take advantage. Call him up and say, hey, Ilyas Akhmadov, please, what can you tell us about Shishani? And we might indeed find out that Ilyas Akhmadov knows something. He may know a lot about the process by which Chechen guerrilla killers, fighters, crazies, have been transferred from Chechnya to Turkey, Syria, Iraq for anti-Assad and now anti-Maliki operations. Right? Remember, the CIA wants to destroy all existing governments. So that's the Chechen group. Remember, of course, Shamil Basayev, for quite a while the head of the Chechen terrorist organization, notoriously a CIA agent, and I would argue that the British role in the Caucasus, Transcaucasus, goes back to the time that David Urquhart was the British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, to the Sublime Porte, back around 1850 or thereabouts, and that's the same David Urquhart who employed Karl Marx working for his newspaper. So we have this side of it. Now, the other side, of course, the Ukrainian situation. Now, in the Ukraine, what have we got? Poroshenko has proven himself to be duplicitous. This is important. We could argue that the offensive, the so-called anti-terror offensive, indeed the murder spree, the punitive expedition of the Ukrainian Soldateska and their fascist Hilfswillige, Hiwi auxiliaries, that is to say, the right sector masquerading as the National Guard. This started before Poroshenko came into power. So from one point of view, you can say Poroshenko was not responsible for what had been happening. However, this week, Poroshenko has assumed full responsibility for this. His hands are now covered with blood because he has allowed the Ukrainian military to continue killing civilians for many days this week, lots of civilians killed. He called for a truce, and the truce means nothing. And correctly, in the Ukrainian Rada parliament, he was confronted with the idea. He said, our military, they're great, professional, they know how to protect civilians. And there was then a catcall, they know how to kill children. And he freaked out and said this was slandering the armed forces, slandering the glorious Ukrainian army. Slava, glory seems to figure a great deal in the calculations of these people. The question now is big pressure on Putin to act, to declare a no-fly zone at the very least, to roll in and shut down these killers, certainly is the demand of many Russians. And I think they've got a good case. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. So, Poroshenko is now as bad as Turchinov and that previous form of the Ukrainian fascist regime. There's an interesting article by Stephen Cohen, which is an attempt to sum up this entire situation, and you can see that he's attempting to maintain a moderate tone. The question about fascism and the Ukrainian government, in my mind, is slightly different from the way Cohen puts it, and this has to do also with economics, right? Since the association agreement of Ukraine with the European Union has now been signed, they're going to be subjected to the buying up, the expropriation, basically, of the Black Earth region by foreign speculators. The pipeline system is going to be transferred to Chevron. The coal and steel will go to Ruhrstahl and Ruhrkohle, German companies. Natural gas price will double. Entire social safety net completely shredded. These are the usual IMF shock therapy, troika kinds of lunatic, neoliberal, genocidal conditionalities. And therefore, we have to revise what we mean by fascism. When Cohen says fascism, he means essentially the Svoboda Party of Chanibok and company and Parubi and so forth, and their hooligan gutter snipe auxiliary, the right sector, now the National Guard. So he thinks of that as fascism. And if you're part of that, you're a fascist. But if you're in a business suit like Yatsenyuk or Timoshenko, then you're not necessarily a fascist. I think this is wrong. I submit that Yatsenyuk is as big or bigger a fascist than Chanibok or Yarosh or the late Muzichka, in the sense that in every Nazi regime, take a look at Hitler, there's a finance minister, and at the beginning that was Hjalmar Schacht, and in this case, the finance minister type is in effect Yatsenyuk, and they have other people who are also on this same line, right? Prodan and others. If you carry out Nazi economics, you are also a Nazi. And whether you have a brown shirt or a black shirt, whether you go around clubbing people in the streets, or whether you are with a business suit sitting in an office and a computer terminal, that's not the main point. If you impose fascist, genocidal economics, you're a fascist. And by that, virtually the entire Ukrainian government qualifies, not just Svoboda, not just right sector. So it's a much more serious situation, and I'm surprised that that Cohen doesn't see it that way, because he was, at least to some extent, an enemy. He was an opponent, or a critic at least, of shock therapy when it was imposed on Russia for the first time. Now, let's come over here to the U.S. Domestic. Some interesting points, right, pointing ahead, and the domestic political discussion. What we've had over the last couple of months is what I would call a rolling epiphany of the sociopathic tendencies of the Republican Party, a rolling epiphany of GOP sociopaths, a rolling epiphany of the tremendously antisocial and destructive ideology of the Republican Party. You know my position. Republican Party has to be destroyed in place. Democratic Party has to be split into two parts, probably a Wall Street majority, but then a very significant anti-Wall Street, pro-labor, populist, New Deal minority. And with that, we would have a fighting chance. Now, let's look at what we've learned about the Republican Party. Are they susceptible to destruction? Obviously, they are. The only thing missing to destroy the Republican Party is an antagonist interested in doing this. Let's just go through some of these examples. It's essentially a series of points at which the Republican Party has absolutely alienated, antagonized large groups in the population. How about the Cloven Bundy case, right? If you don't like gun-toting, racist reactionaries who declare themselves above the law and set up checkpoints on highways and harass American citizens, well, then you're not going to like Cloven Bundy. Now, lots and lots of Republicans, including little Rand Paul, they were all over Cloven Bundy. They loved him until he made his racist tirade. But and I think that was foreshadowed by the response of these same people, although it was somewhat muted, to Kokesh. Remember, a year ago today, Kokesh wanted to have an armed march, rifle-toting, loaded rifle-toting, white supremacists and other racists, because that's who it would have been. Don't tell me, oh, no, that would not have been it. That's exactly who it would have been. We're going to march from Virginia into Washington, D.C. No Republican took a strong stand against that. But from Kokesh to Bundy this year, the right-wing anarchism, right, the inherent chaos of this entire wing has essentially alienated anybody who's interested in normal life, law and order and settled conditions. In the case of the Brat election, right, Brat attempted to run and did run, succeeded, on the basis of anti-immigrant, anti-Latino hysteria. So the xenophobia of the Republican Party very much in evidence, right? Any Asian, any Latin American horrified by that. Then we have McDaniel versus Thad Cochran, and the pro-Thad Cochran leaflet pointed to McDaniel as somebody who wanted to cut food stamps, wipe them out, and wipe out federal aid to schools, which in Mississippi is the only source of special education for handicapped students. So McDaniel was repudiated, but from that, if you're black, it's clear McDaniel is coming after you. He wants to destroy the programs that you depend on. McDaniel does not have to spout racism, although he did, but the main thing is if you're attacking life and death programs for a minority, then you're attempting to wipe out that minority. They're going to fight back. Now we've just had Hobby Lobby, and this, of course, is neo-feudalism on the march. This is horrendous. I hope to talk more about this in a minute. But you could also see from the response of the pro-Republican media, and indeed a few politicians, that there was immense gloating over this, right? They love the power of the corporations, and they love the idea that the lives of these poor women are being made much more difficult. So the war on women is real. Misogyny is real. Republican Party hates women. So we've got them antagonizing a new group. Now, not to be outdone, the predator Hen Sarling comes forward with his program to destroy the Export-Import Bank, destroy 250,000 jobs, deal a fatal blow to U.S. high-tech exports, be it Boeing aircraft, General Electric generators, and other kinds of equipment. So that means business of all groups, right? Not just people, normal middle class, Latinos, other immigrants, blacks, women, not just those groups, but also business, absolutely antagonized and attacked by these lunatics of the Republican Party. And now we've had this rent-a-mob in California staging an anti-refugee riot with women and children as the target, a disgusting, vile spectacle, white trash on parade, attacking these women. So now the anti-Latino xenophobic element is brought to the fore. These were the people we were attacking some years back as the Minutemen, and the scoundrel who led that organization may or may not be with them, but that's essentially the idea. It was a rent-a-mob. You could also see there was probably some complicity from the local police. Now, between Bundy and this rent-a-mob, I think we're getting the idea that the Obama administration, in its cowardice, is afraid to enforce the laws against armed lunatics. They feel that an incident might hurt their chances in November. I think that's very short-sighted. But that's the rolling epiphany. The Republican Party is courting its own destruction. All you need is an antagonist determined to bring that about. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C., and this time we're taping on Thursday, July 3rd, for broadcast on Saturday, July 5th. Now, we want to get an update on the Nebraska Senate campaign. The point of this is the following. If you don't like what's going on with the Supreme Court, you've got to be concerned about the Senate, among other things, because that's where Supreme Court nominees have to be approved. That goes for all high-level executive branch employees. The Senate has an impact on foreign policy. So there are a lot of good reasons here to prevent a person of the dubious character of this Ben Sasse from becoming the U.S. Senator from Nebraska. So we know that the alternative to that is Dan Burdorf, B-U-H-R-D-O-R-F, and that's danfornebraska.com. And it turns out we're now exactly in the critical point. The month of July will decide whether or not he gets on the ballot, and this is going to depend on, I think, to a significant degree, the efforts of this audience, you people who are the habitual listeners to this program. So to get a summary of that, let's go to Daniela Walls, who is from the Tax Wall Street Party, and that's, of course, the party that Dan Burdorf is working for. Yes. Hi, Daniela.
Okay.
Tell us everything.
So good. Glad you set me up with all that. So, yeah, our movement is growing. We got a candidate on the ballot last year for mayor of New York City, and we have a Pennsylvania Tax Wall Street Party Democrat, Adam Rodriguez, gearing up to run in 2016. Randy, as you know, is also running in New York State for governor, and we have branches starting in several states, including South Carolina, Colorado, and Texas. But the hub is now Nebraska, and this is where it's happening. Visit danfornebraska.com as soon as you can. Right now, as I'm saying this, if possible, and we can follow along. So we have Dan Burdorf running on the full program, and we are fighting, going head-to-head with Ben Sasse, the Republicans' new consensus establishment candidate. And Webster, the Democrats aren't going to do it. They're failing. The Democrats' compromise and collude with the Republicans to let in the worst of the worst, for example, into the Supreme Court. Then you get Citizens United, and these things that say corporations have more power than people. And this is all because the Democrats collude with Republicans. So the whole point now is to get a senator in there to stop them. This is why this is why this run for Dan, to get him in there, he won't be one of these, he won't let these lying reactionary judges get through the judiciary who want to overrun what's the little that's left of the New Deal. And
all right, so what can people do?
Okay, you can go to danfornebraska.com to make a donation, and we need volunteers. I'm gonna get into why we need volunteers because we're having to double our efforts. So, and we're gonna have to do twice as much in half the time right now. But I was just going to mention real quick that Dan's here to bring these New Deal ideas back into the public discussion and provide the real leadership that Democrats just aren't. And so the whole fight is here now with us in this race. And if we're going to get a New Deal and get back, our quality of life, we need to land this first punch, and Nebraska is the place to do it. So I'm begging people for your help today. At this moment in the campaign, we're going to have to, like I said, do twice as much as we've done in half as much time. And we're going to need to use a lot more resources than we have. Your listeners, Webster, have been generous so far getting us off the ground, but we need to redouble our efforts to get signatures in the less populated western parts of the state now, and we need help. We need help now. We have a huge state to cover, and we need to get out to other areas of the state to meet our district quotas, and we're going to need money for gas especially. Democrats and Republicans obviously don't have to think twice about, this sort of thing, because they're fundraising from banks, corporate donors, and their established parties, but we do. We could have to be Webster now on Monday in one end of the state and then in Tuesday in the other, literally. And hit these hubs, we need to drive at least an hour and a half each day, each way. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be 3 hours of driving. So we especially need gas money, and sometimes we're going to need to stay in really cheap hotels so that we can spend a few days in some of these way far out locations. We also need committed people now who want this program to succeed, and everybody's going to have to make sacrifices. We have 1 month left, and everyone on this campaign is sacrificing. Dan sacrificed his time and money to fly to New York last year to get the Tax Wall Street Party on the mayoral ballot and plant that flag in the belly of the beast. And the point I was trying to make with that is that Dan's done this. He knows what it's like. It's really hard, but it's also really rewarding. And, you'll be able to say that you got someone on the ballot to fight in our age, to fight like the financial oligarchs and these dark money players.
Okay, now look, we know the Eric Cantor campaign spent $125,000 on steakhouses. We can be sure that if people give money to the Dan Burdorf campaign, it's going to go for essential things, as you're just saying. But now, suppose
we're not making any money off this campaign, just gas and a little bit of travel expenses.
Right. So suppose I'm somebody who's considering going. Now, if I want to come as a volunteer, what awaits me? What is this going to be like as I get there, and where will I end up? What will I be doing?
When you arrive in Lincoln, we're going to greet you at the airport, and you have a really nice place to stay. We have an office that we've expanded with private rooms, private bathrooms, and a laundry facility. So you're not going to be staying in some terrifying dump of a place. And at night we'll have an enjoyable time, and we'll go to do activities and go see bands and go to restaurants. But during the day, we're going to have to stand out on the street and ask for signatures. And it's beautiful out in Nebraska. It's nice out here. So you won't, come visit.
Okay, who do they contact?
They contact, I'll answer these emails, but contact danfornebraska@gmail. And here, I want to make a special plea right now, Webster, to anybody who lives in Nebraska's 2nd and 3rd congressional districts. This is where we especially need
What are the principal cities so people can guess where they are?
Well, Omaha is in the 2nd district. But the 3rd district is going to be our real difficult, scary one because it's all spread out and it's rural. The largest city in the 3rd district is 10,000 people.
And which one is that? Tell us. Because people don't know their own congressional districts, I'm afraid.
The 3rd congressional district. There's 3 congressional districts in Nebraska, and we need a quota of signatures from each of the 3. Mm-hmm. I don't remember what towns comprise the 3rd district.
It's the west, though, right? It's the west of Nebraska?
Yes, it's out in the west. I'm sorry, yes, it's out in the western part of the state, exactly.
Okay. So that would mean people could come over from Colorado and help us, too.
Yes, right, exactly. That's a good idea. Perfect. Thanks for saying that. If anybody knows anybody in the 2nd and 3rd congressional districts, this is where we need you. So contact danfornebraska at Gmail, and this is urgent. So we, like I said, have met our first district quota, but now we're going to have to migrate. And people, maybe can't always do what they want to do or fight where they want to fight. Sometimes there's something bigger at stake and that you need to get behind. So don't just depend on us or someone else to do it. It's now the time to come to Nebraska. Or if you can't come, then please help by making a donation, the largest at this point that you can, because we need to travel to such far locations. And we just need these resources. And thank you to the people who have contributed and are already helping. But if you're not, consider that this fight against Wall Street is the fight of our time, and ask yourself, what you're doing to fight financial oligarchy in your time. And ask yourself if you want a tax Wall Street Party candidate on the ballot in Nebraska, which is our heartland, which will be a black arrow in the heart of the oligarchs with a Wall Street sales tax. And do people want infrastructure or the U.S. to be rebuilt into a 21st century infrastructure? Do they want 0 to 0.75% student loans instead of, God knows what they're up to now, 6 or 8%, I think? Do people want Medicare for all? Do you want to restore American industry and family farms? Do you want a global peace race? Do you want to save the VA on this 4th of July from any cuts? Do you want to hire 1,000 new VA doctors?
Daniela, do we have a phone number they can call? Very quickly, the phone number.
I don't have a phone number. danfornebraska.com and contact me at danfornebraska@gmail.com.
We'll see you next week then. danfornebraska.com.
And danfornebraska@gmail. Thank you, Webster.
danfornebraska@gmail.com. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. All right, now we have to continue our vast panorama of anti-Wall Street struggle as usual. We're hoping to bring you a report from the sidewalks of New York. Is that succeeding for us? Okay, wonderful. Let me just set this up. As people know, Randy Credico ran last year as Democratic Party candidate for mayor of the city of New York. Wall Street sales tax prominently in his program. Then he went on as the Tax Wall Street Party candidate for mayor of the city of New York all the way to November. He's now attempting to get on the ballot to challenge the Wall Street puppet Andrew Cuomo, who is another threat to put a Wall Street stooge in the White House. But now we've got this competition from a number of sides, right? We've got this Zephyr Teachout, and I've looked at her program. This is a very watered-down, very weak program. Zephyr Teachout actually founded something called A Way Forward, where she comes out for the Conyers Securities Transfer Tax and Job Program. But as far as I can see, her campaign does not do that, and that is the Teachout Woo campaign. And let me say, the best thing I've seen from New York politicians this week is that this guy, Howie Hawkins, who is the Green Party candidate for Senate, has called on Cuomo to allow open debates with Cuomo, Randy Credico, Zephyr Teachout, and Howie Hawkins. And I would urge politicians to go along with that. And I'm wondering if Zephyr Teachout has endorsed that very useful proposal, because as Howie Hawkins said, you could learn something from Randy Credico, among others. So, Randy, I take it you're there?
Yes, I am, sir. How are you doing there, Randy?
Tell us how it's going. First of all, how long do you have to finish getting your signatures?
We have until next Thursday to turn them in. So
next Thursday, so we're down to the stretch. Yeah. Talk to us,
We're down to the stretch. I have people, I got you need, first of all, 14 congressional districts with 200 signatures or more, or 100 or more, so you really need 200. So I've got that covered from, congressmen I don't even know, from Steve Israel to Grace Ming, all the way up to Sean Patrick Maloney. So we were able to cover about 18 of these congressional districts. And, you need 15,000 valid signatures, and we're going to probably turn in around 25 or more. And I had a meeting that they brokered by Mark Green, the perennial candidate before I became the perennial candidate. And he brokered the deal that we would not challenge each other's petitions. It's me and Zephyr Teachout. Good. Me and Zephyr Teachout will not challenge one another. I was never planning to challenge her petitions. I wasn't going to challenge anybody's petitions because the mechanism to get on the ballot is so incumbent-oriented that it doesn't spark real, democratic participation in the process. Right. So it's really, you've gone through it before. You could have 1 million petitions, and you can get a lawyer to find a way to knock you off. The establishment party hacks will go out there and do anything they can to get you off. But I'm confident we'll make the ballot. And it'll be Teachout, who I told early on that she must support the Tobin tax or the Wall Street sales tax in her proposal, and she agreed to that. There's a lot she doesn't know about the state of New York. She's only been there for 5 years, which means every kid post-pre-K has been in New York longer than she has. And it's a tough state to really get to know the lay of the land.
Randy, I have to tell you, I looked on Zephyr Teachout, the Teachout Woo website, and she doesn't really say anything about taxing Wall Street, does she?
Well, she hasn't. She agreed to say that she would, but she's more of a, everyone thinks that Elizabeth Warren is the best thing ever, and so if she's in that image and she supports probably a lot of her positions, I don't know where she is even on this one, on the Wall Street sales tax.
She has never endorsed it, and indeed, Elizabeth Warren has gone backwards on student loans. Last year, Elizabeth Warren wanted 0.75% paid for by the Federal Reserve, and now she's up to about 3.5% on student loans. So this is not encouraging.
0.0% student loans should be picked up by the Federal Reserve. We got to start, using the money to even the playing field. We have to have, I believe, Medicare for all, and we can do this with this Wall Street sales tax. We could underwrite the entire Metropolitan Transit Authority. If this were to go through, we could raise $60 billion a year. And I know they all say they're going to move on. They're not going to move on because it's going to be the beginning of a national movement that you helped start, that you helped kickstart. People still don't understand it. It may take some time to really get this thing going. But, of course, the politicians that are there right now are Wall Street stooges, whether it be Bill de Blasio. These guys are like linebackers that get in the way of moving the ball, the tax Wall Street ball forward. They're linebackers for the establishment.
And I noticed that de Blasio worked on, what did he work on? The Obama campaign, the Hillary campaign?
Yeah,
and then we've got Teachout worked on Howard Dean. So we're getting the
Howard Dean
leftover communications directors from failed
Howard
campaigns.
Dean, just as bad as the rest of them. If you take a look at his program, they all made their bones by saying they were against the Iraq War after the Iraq War had already started, and that's about it. Other than that, you don't get much from that guy, whatever his name is, Howard Dean or de Blasio. These are just hack politicians that you have described that are executives for Wall Street that are there managing their interests. That's all they are.
And I looked at your website, and your claim is that you are the most progressive candidate for governor since Franklin D. Roosevelt himself. And I have to tell you, my finding is it's true. You are, especially compared
that doesn't mean he was that progressive. I'm not saying FDR was that progressive. He was bad on a lot of issues, I suppose, but there's not been a guy in office that is more progressive than I am, ever. You can't name one.
Yes, of course. So I'm agreeing with you. I think that's correct. And I urge people to look at the program. Go to this Teachout Woo. Take a look at Credico, and you'll see that the Credico program is significantly more radical. And indeed, radical is not something you'd say about Teachout.
Right. Mine is your program, my economic program. If people like you, then they'll like my economic program because you're an advisor, unofficial advisor, because I basically have glommed everything that you have said economically in terms of taxing Wall Street and the banks and put that in as the leitmotif of my economic rebuilding program.
Okay. So signatures by next Thursday. It means, people, if you want to help Randy Credico, this is a good time to do it this July 4th weekend, but the signatures have to go in next Thursday, so there's need for assistance. Randy, we'll keep in touch with you. We want to find out what the decision is about getting on the ballot.
Creditcode2014.com.
Creditcode2014.com. Okay. See you soon. Good luck. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So we've gone through this rolling epiphany of the reactionary Republicans, right? Why they are incompatible with the future of human civilization in this part of the world. And, of course, we ought to just a word or two about this immigration stuff, right? This rent-a-mob in California attacking these terrified women and little children. I think this is a vile and disgusting spectacle. This is un-American. This is unworthy of a civilized country, and it shows that those people they are the enemies of civilization. There's no other way to put it. Now, in particular, why immigration is needed goes something like this. You look around the world, and you find that most of the great economic powers are going to suffer from a demographic crisis. Russia has had a shrinking population. They may be doing somewhat better now, but there's a gap there that will not go away. You look at Europe, Italy, Germany, France, populations shrinking. The entire European Union. Same thing goes for Japan in an extreme form. Japanese population getting older and older. And China, because of the very ill-advised one child per family, they will also have severe demographic problems. Means the United States is the only one of the large powers which will not have this demographic crisis because there is this marginal propensity of people in the world, especially Central and Latin America, to come here and want to work. This is a tremendous advantage. This is a trump card for the United States. Anybody who wants to throw that trump card away should have his head examined, and they should not be allowed in government. The slogan is, learn Spanish or learn Chinese. And I'll tell you, Spanish is much easier, and you won't be taking orders in Spanish, but you would be taking orders in Chinese, and this goes for Hensoling as well. It's also important to see people from Latin America. This is Western Christianity, right? This is Latin Christianity, Western civilization. The assimilation problems here are minimal compared to what other groups might pose, let's say. Therefore, for the question of the future, in order to maintain a labor force, you need immigration. Now, there are burdens, and obviously we want to make sure that the burdens go where they should, to Wall Street, because those are the people that have created many of these problems. The legitimate beef of the average person is to say, well, if somebody comes from Guatemala, they're going to be willing to work for pennies on the dollar. That is why you must have a minimum wage, a $15 minimum wage, a living wage, and also why you need to have a strong union movement to defend wages. That's the legitimate beef, that immigrants can be used as strikebreakers to drive down wages. That's legit. Got to take measures against it, though, because the premise is you've got to have the immigrants, otherwise you face a collapsing and dying civilization. So you're going to need card check, and you're going to need to go back to the old Wagner Act, not the Taft-Hartley law with right to work. Right to work has got to end, and that can be done state by state, or it can be done all at once on the federal level. Now, we've talked about the Democratic Party. Mrs. Clinton, her complacency, her sense of her own entitlement and inevitability are generating a wave of resentment against this charming lady, which I think is destined to grow. $250,000 for a speech. My God, she's a political candidate, and she wants $250,000 for a speech? She should get nothing. And these students are absolutely right. Cough up that money. Give it back. Your Clinton Foundation is whatever it is, but that is no reason to loot educational institutions at a time when student debt has gone over $1 trillion, right? Very easy to go into the Democratic primaries and tear Mrs. Clinton to shreds. Why are you taking $250,000 for half an hour of your idiotic gab when we've got $1 trillion crushing the younger generation. And in particular, I would also go beyond this to the policy failures of Mrs. Clinton. The health care plan proposed in the Clinton administration was ruined by her politically. These were the years of Ira Magaziner, as people may remember, and her obsessive insistence on doing it all in secret, not allowing the Congress to participate, and then pulling it out all at once, and then, of course, having concentrated all that resentment and hatred on herself, failing. So the debacle of health care, which a lot of people needed and would have benefited from, largely her fault. The abolition of welfare, that is to say, aid to families with dependent children, a title of the original Social Security Act of 1935, done by Bill Clinton, approved by her. One of the worst things that Clinton had done. 1999, the legalization of interstate banking and the abolition of the Glass-Steagall law. That was their handiwork. Let me just say, parenthetically, to restore Glass-Steagall by itself is no longer enough. It wouldn't work the same way, because what they did the following year, in 2000, the deregulation of derivatives. Once you have deregulated derivatives in this way, you would either have to ban derivatives, which is certainly I'm in favor of partial bans, but I don't know whether it would be possible to ban all derivatives without creating chaos. But once you have derivatives, the old Glass-Steagall formula will not do the job. It's not enough. And this goes for the LaRouche people who think that the Glass-Steagall is the universal remedy, right? The universal touchstone of economic recovery. No, because with derivatives in the world, it's almost impossible to maintain that division. So what you would have to do, of course, is to ban certain kinds of derivatives, ban credit default swaps, ban collateralized debt obligations, and otherwise rely on a robust 1% Wall Street sales tax to essentially dry up the other forms of parasitical derivatives. The other question, of course, the bombing of Serbia, that the current era of aggression and chaos was the vandalistic bombing of Serbia in the spring of 1999. Now, we've tried to be nice to Clinton that this was really organized by Gore and so forth. On the other hand, he could have exerted himself probably and stopped it. Although he had just survived a coup attempt, he might as well take a chance. He only had one more year in the White House anyway. We look at the Democratic field. Hillary Clinton, we've just gone through her. Elizabeth Warren, again, as we talked about with Credico, Elizabeth Warren has gone from a 0.75% student loan interest rate paid for by the Federal Reserve to 3.5 or so percent under her current legislation. This is not progress. Bernie Sanders on the sidelines. Governor Martin O'Malley of Maryland certainly has some achievements, right? Maryland has abolished the death penalty. It has enacted the DREAM Act. It has enacted gay marriage and therefore deprived the reactionaries of the ability to use that issue for their other goals. But this Democratic field is absolutely insufficient. The American people deserve better. They deserve a much better alternative. In particular, among the frontrunners, there's nobody qualified to be president in terms of understanding of economics and of foreign policy. Now, for the rest of the year, we've got the following problems. We need the following bills passed urgently. The highway bill has got to be passed to keep construction going. The farm bill has got to increase the budget for food stamps. We'll be back in a minute. We'll sum up these tasks for Congress in just a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Already our final segment. The to-do list for Congress is immense, right? The highway bill, this is hundreds of thousands of jobs in highway construction. Now it's summer. This is when these contracts should be issued. They should be building things out there. This is not happening. Reactionary Republicans did it. The Farm Bill has to go through. We're against any cuts to food stamps. Food stamps have to be fully funded. They need to be increased. And the Democrats are willing to capitulate on that issue very bad. The Export-Import Bank has got to be refunded before the end of September. So we've got July, August, September to save the Export-Import Bank 250,000 jobs there. We need to restore unemployment benefits for people who have been out of work for more than 26 weeks. Remember that used to be 99 weeks in many states, and the people beyond that, the 99ers were the ones for whom there was nothing. Now it's the 26ers. If you're over 26 weeks, you get nothing. That's got to be changed. The Reed-Heller bill, Reed of Rhode Island and Heller of Nevada, the two states with the most unemployment, that's at least a step in that direction. We need to establish a federal minimum wage of $15, and we need student loan relief. Again, refinance the entire student loan burden at very nearly 0%, as Credico says, through the use of the Federal Reserve. Make the Federal Reserve pay. So those are the things that ought to get done, and that's what will be. Those will be the main issues now in the second half of the year. With that kind of a combination, a determined antagonist could set up a series of set-piece battles in which the Republican Party would essentially alienate and attack all of the principal groups in U.S. society. And at that point, the collapse of the Republican Party could already be well advanced by the November election, even as they fight among themselves. Unfortunately, Obama does not think in these terms. He thinks rather how to prop up the Republican Party as an excuse for his own inactivity, timidity, and failure. Now then, let's take a look back at World War I. I mentioned a couple of things. The book you really want to get is this one with my essay, Edward VII, The Triple Entente and World War I. And it's in this book, La France Conquise, published by Progressive Press of California, after I had dug this out of the Library of Congress some years back. In terms of avoiding the war, let's not try to say who brought it on. It was these British Freemasons and a Freemasonic network centered on Edward VII. To avoid the total catastrophe, to avoid the war is one question, 14, 15, 16, and then to avoid the total catastrophe, 1917 to 1918. What could you have done? Well, one way to avoid World War I altogether was the very simple thing that Germany could and should have done, maintain the Bismarck policy of a reinsurance treaty with the Russian Empire. As long as you had Germany and Russia determined not to wage war one against the other, no general European war was possible. And it was Bismarck who had maintained this wise policy. It grew out of the three emperors, or Drei Kaiser Bund, three emperors diplomacy of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so forth. That is the Rückversicherungs policy, reinsurance. And, of course, this was changed by the feckless, idiotic, superficial, obsessive, neurotic, psychotic William II, Kaiser Wilhelm, a absolute lightweight, obsessed with his English mother, whom he hated, and his withered arm, and all kinds of other complexes. And just the presence of William II, I think, indicates that the Fritz Fischer thesis is not tenable, that this was all a nefarious plan by Germany. William II was incapable of any nefarious plan or any plan. All right, so that's one opportunity in the 1890s. Don't allow the encirclement of Germany by a French-Russian dual alliance. Right? Book about that by George Kennan. The other one, of course, is that in the Boer War, when the British set up concentration camps and killed 20,000 children, and these were white Germanic children, right? So this went against the entire race theory which dominated the times. There was a wave of hatred against the British which could have produced a continental bloc That is to say, France, Germany, Russia, essentially saying no more war on the continent. Don't let the British play one against the other. This was, to some degree, the policy of Count Witte of Russia and of Gabriel Hanotaux of France. And this thing was wrecked once again by William II, who went around boasting that he had saved the British Empire in 1901 and 1902, when the hatred against the British for their Boer War excesses was boiling over. Now, the one who did learn the lesson of the Boer War was Edward VII, who said, my God, this is a League of Cambrai moment. This is similar to what happened to the Venetians in May of 1509, when all the countries of Europe, with the exception of Henry VIII of Britain, but all others, lined up against Venice and tried to crush and destroy Venice. So he could see that there was that danger, so therefore he immediately began this diplomacy, an alliance with Japan against Germany and Russia in the Far East, then the Entente Cordiale with France, 1903, and then 1907, what was considered impossible, the Entente with Russia. But they had to weaken Russia with the 1905 revolution and the defeat in the Far East. Theodore Roosevelt helping to save Japan from financial collapse by mediating the Russo-Japanese War, because if the Japanese had collapsed, then the Russians might have retaken some of the things that they'd lost. There is this meeting at Björkjö of William II and Nicholas II, where they both pledge to oppose the designs of their evil uncle, right? These are the two doomed nephews, two doomed cousins, both of them nephews of Edward VII, the uncle of Europe, and they tried to essentially restore the old reinsurance treaty, but by that time, the erratic, unstable behavior of William II and indeed also the unstable behavior of Nicholas II meant that the bureaucracy, the German bureaucracy wouldn't trust the Russians, and the Russian bureaucracy wouldn't trust the Germans. It would have been possible then to avoid the catastrophe by executing the Schlieffen Plan in August and September of 1914 and ending the war in the West rather quickly. This did not work, and the debate about this centers on von Moltke the Younger, the German defense minister. Did he fatally weaken the German right flank in such a way as to lose the first battle of the Marne and therefore faced prolonged trench warfare and ultimately defeat in the West? I should have mentioned before we got to this point, it would have also been possible for the Second International, the Socialist International, to avoid the Second World War. Their plan had been, which they announced, was that in case of threatening war, to declare a general strike and overthrow the governments in every country that wanted to join the war. The one leader of the Second International who wanted to implement that plan is, I would say, Jean Jaurès. But Jean Jaurès was assassinated shortly after the Archduke was assassinated in the first days of the war. The other possibilities for ending the war, once it had gotten going, Benedict XV of the Vatican tried to mediate a peaceful solution, an end to the war, and the Emperor Charles of Austria, Karl, the one who came to the throne after Franz Joseph died, and since Franz Ferdinand was dead, he became the emperor. He tried to end the war. This is in 1916 and into 1917. Didn't work. Another possibility, Woodrow Wilson could have told everybody, I'm not coming into your war, make peace. And that would have meant making peace in 1916 or 1917. But Woodrow Wilson, of course, was a pro-British warmonger. So we'll see you next week on World Crisis Radio.